After years in the orphanage, we inherited a farm. But in the basement there was something hidden. Ethan held his younger brother's hand tightly as he watched the dirt road stretching ahead. At 12, he had learned to distrust any good news that reached the orphanage, and this promise of inheritance seemed too good to be true. It was when the social worker stopped the car in front of the rusty gate and pointed to the worn wooden structure rising in the middle of the property. "This is it, boys. This is the farm you inherited," said the woman, checking the papers for the third time since they left the city. Noah, only 9 years old, opened his eyes wide upon seeing the chickens pecking freely in the yard. It was the first time in his life he had seen real animals outside of picture books. "Are you sure it's really ours, Mrs. Jennifer?" asked Ethan, still reluctant to get out of the car. "The documents are all correct. You are the only living heirs of Robert Mitchell Anderson. He was your father's brother," explained the social worker, putting the papers back in her bag. "But why did we never know we had an uncle?" questioned Noah, already getting out of the vehicle with his worn backpack on his back. Jennifer sighed, showing that she didn't have all the answers either. "Sometimes families drift apart for complicated reasons, child. What matters now is that you have a home." Ethan got out of the car slowly, observing every detail around him. The main house urgently needed repairs to the porch boards, and the roof had several loose shingles. But there was something comforting in the simplicity of that place, which contrasted with the institutional coldness of the orphanage. "Let's take a look inside," suggested Jennifer, walking toward the front door. The lock was stuck, and they had to push the door hard to open it. The smell of mold and dampness immediately invaded their nostrils, revealing that the house had been closed for a long time. "Oh, what a bad smell," complained Noah, covering his nose with his shirt sleeve. "Just open the windows to air it out," said Jennifer, looking for the light switches. The electricity was working, which was already good news. The living room was simple, with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. There were photographs hanging on the wall, but they were too dark to make out the faces. "Look, Ethan, there's a staircase going up," exclaimed Noah, pointing to the wooden steps leading to the second floor. "Easy, Noah. Let's first see everything down here," replied the older brother, maintaining his protective stance. The kitchen was in reasonable condition, though it needed a deep cleaning. Jennifer turned on the faucets to check for running water, and to everyone's relief, water came out normally after a few seconds of air and rust. "At least the basics are working," she murmured, making notes in her notebook. It was then that Noah discovered a door leading to what appeared to be a basement. "Ethan, come see this. There's another floor down here," shouted the boy, trying to open the heavy wooden door. "Noah, don't touch anything without me seeing it first," warned Ethan, quickly approaching. The basement door creaked loudly as it opened, revealing a steep staircase that disappeared into darkness. A cold, damp air rose from below, carrying with it a different odor from the rest of the house. "I think we'd better leave exploring that for another day," suggested Jennifer, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of going down there. "But what if there's something important down there?" insisted Noah, ever curious. "If there is, it won't run away, child. First, we need to check if the structure is safe," explained the social worker, closing the basement door again. Ethan noticed the worried expression on Jennifer's face and decided she was right. There was enough time to explore every corner of the farm after they had settled in properly. "Let's see the rooms upstairs," he suggested, directing the group toward the main staircase. The second floor had 3 small bedrooms and a bathroom. The rooms were empty except for some old beds with mattresses that needed to be replaced. The windows offered a broad view of the property, showing fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. "It's so big," commented Noah, leaning against the window. "Is it really all ours?" "According to the documents, the property is 37 acres, informed Jennifer, consulting her papers again. Ethan couldn't quite believe what was happening. After 6 years in the orphanage, being moved from foster family without ever finding a permanent place, the idea of having a home of their own seemed like an impossible dream. "Can I have that room there?" asked Noah, pointing to the smallest of the 3. "Of course you can. You can choose anyone," replied Ethan, feeling a wave of tenderness at seeing his brother's enthusiasm. Jennifer spent the rest of the afternoon explaining the bureaucratic details of the inheritance and the responsibilities that now fell upon them. There were documents to sign, taxes to pay, and a series of legal matters that Ethan, despite his precocious maturity, could barely comprehend. "You will receive a monthly state pension until you turn 18, she explained. "And there is also a small sum of cash that came with the inheritance, enough for the first few months of basic expenses." "What if we can't manage all of this?" asked Ethan, always thinking of the negative possibilities. "There is a support network for situations like yours, but I'm sure you'll do just fine," replied Jennifer with an encouraging smile. When the social worker left, promising to return the following week to check on how they were adapting, the brothers were alone for the first time in their new home. The silence of the farm was unlike anything they had experienced before. At the orphanage, there were always noises from other children, staff talking, or the television on in the common room. Here, all they could hear was the wind rustling the trees and the distant song of birds. "Ethan, do you really think we'll get to stay here?" asked Noah, sitting on the porch to watch the chickens. "I don't know, Noah. But at least for now, it's ours," replied the older brother, trying to sound more confident than he actually felt. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out, now continuing. That first night, they slept in their new rooms using the blankets they had brought from the orphanage. The old mattresses weren't comfortable, but having a room to oneself was a luxury neither of them had experienced before. Ethan took a long time to fall asleep. He lay staring at the dark ceiling, thinking about all the uncertainties that awaited them. How would they take care of such a large place? What would happen if they couldn't pay the bills? And why had their parents never mentioned the existence of this uncle? In the next room, Noah was also awake, but for completely different reasons. He was too excited to sleep, imagining all the adventures they could have on that farm. Maybe they could raise more animals, plant a vegetable garden, or even build a treehouse. The next morning they were awakened by the crowing of a rooster that had apparently become the farm's official alarm clock. Ethan opened his eyes, confused for a moment, forgetting where he was until reality returned. "Noah, are you awake?" he called, tapping lightly on the wall that separated their rooms. "It's been a while. Come see outside. There are a bunch of new animals," the boy replied excitedly. Ethan quickly got dressed and went downstairs to find Noah already in the backyard, watching fascinated as the chickens pecked around for food. "They must be hungry," observed Noah. "Do we even know how to take care of them?" "We'll have to learn," replied Ethan, realizing there were far more responsibilities involved in that inheritance than he had imagined. They walked around the property, trying to understand the extent of what was now theirs. There was a shed behind the main house, full of rusty tools and farming equipment that neither of them knew how to use. A small orchard with fruit trees that looked neglected for years stretched out behind the shed. "Look at how much space we have," said Noah, running through the open field. "We could get a horse." "Noah, slow down. First we need to manage to take care of the chickens," laughed Ethan, infected by his brother's enthusiasm. It was during this initial exploration that they noticed a tall, burly man watching them from the opposite side of the fence that bordered the property. He didn't wave or introduce himself, just stood there, watching with an expression Ethan couldn't decipher. "Who could that man be?" whispered Noah. "Must be a neighbor," replied Ethan, but something about the stranger's posture made him uneasy. The man finally walked away without a word, but Ethan had a feeling it wouldn't be the last time they'd see him around. They decided to go back inside and try to make breakfast with the few ingredients Jennifer had left for them. The kitchen still smelled musty, but after opening all the windows and wiping down the basic surfaces, it started to feel more livable. "Ethan, do you know how to fry an egg?" asked Noah, looking at the fresh eggs they had found in the chicken coop. "I think I can manage," replied the older brother, although at the orphanage they rarely had the chance to cook. While Ethan tried not to burn the eggs, Noah explored the kitchen cabinets looking for useful utensils. That's when he found a drawer full of old papers and yellowed photographs. "Ethan, come look at this. There are pictures here," called Noah, spreading the images out on the table. The photographs showed people they had never seen, posing in front of the same house they now lived in, but from different times. Some looked very old in black and white, while others were more recent and in color. "Do you think this man here is our uncle?" asked Noah, pointing to a middle-aged man in one of the more recent photos. Ethan studied the image carefully. The man had features that vaguely reminded him of his father's, at least from the few photos he could remember seeing at the orphanage. Could be. But why did he never contact us? Murmured Ethan, more to himself than to Noah. Among the papers, they found old bills, receipts, and some documents they couldn't fully understand. There was also a paper that seemed to be a map of the property, showing divisions and markings that didn't make much sense to them. Look here. There's an X marked on this spot, observed Noah, pointing to an area on the map that seemed to correspond to the house's basement. Ethan frowned, looking more closely at the marking. There were notes beside it, but the handwriting was too faded to read. Do you think there's something hidden in the basement? Asked Noah, his eyes shining with curiosity. Noah, that's probably just marking pipes or electrical wiring, replied Ethan, trying to keep his feet on the ground. But the truth was, he was also curious about that marking. And about the basement, they hadn't properly explored the day before. They finished eating in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The smell of fried eggs mingled with the morning scent of the farm, creating a feeling of home that neither of them had experienced before. Ethan, do you think our parents would like to see us here? Asked Noah suddenly, with a seriousness unusual for his age. The question caught Ethan off guard. He rarely spoke about their parents with Noah, mainly because his own memories were fragmented and painful. He vaguely remembered a brown-haired woman who sang to him before bed, and a tall man who carried him on his shoulders around the backyard of their house. But the details were hazy, mixed with dreams and imagination. I think so, Noah. I think they'd like to know we're together and that we have a place of our own, he replied, choosing his words carefully. Noah nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. Ethan realized his brother needed these moments of connection with the past they had lost so early. They decided to dedicate the rest of the morning to cleaning the house. They started with the bedrooms, removing the accumulated dust and organizing the few belongings they owned. Noah found pleasure in arranging his room exactly as he wanted, choosing which shelf to put his books on and where to hang the few clothes he had. Ethan was more practical, focusing on making his space functional, but deep down, he also felt a profound satisfaction in having a place he could call his own, where no one would move him to another family or another institution. When they went down for lunch, they heard the sound of an engine approaching. Ethan looked out the window and saw an old truck stopping in front of the gate. The same man they had seen watching them in the morning got out of the vehicle and walked toward the house. Noah, stay inside, instructed Ethan, going out to meet the visitor on the porch. Good afternoon, son, greeted the man, stopping at the foot of the steps. I'm Gerald Thompson, owner of the neighboring farm. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Ethan, and that's my brother Noah, he replied, maintaining a respectful distance. Gerald was an imposing man, about 50 years old, with large, calloused hands that betrayed years of hard work. His small, penetrating eyes seemed to always be calculating something. So you're the boys who inherited this place, he said, looking around with an expression Ethan couldn't interpret. Yes, sir. It seems he was our uncle, replied Ethan, still unsure how to handle the situation. Robert was a complicated person, commented Gerald, shaking his head. He kept this property half abandoned for years. He was difficult to deal with. Did you know him well? Asked Ethan, hoping to get information about the uncle they had never known. Well enough, Gerald replied vaguely. Look, son, I'll be direct with you. You're too young to take care of a place like this. A farm isn't child's play. The remark sounded more like a threat than friendly advice. Ethan immediately felt defensive. We'll manage, sir. We have a right to this inheritance, he replied firmly. Gerald gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You have the right, I don't dispute that. But having the right and making it work are two different things, he said, walking a few steps across the yard. This land has potential, but it needs someone who understands the business. What are you trying to say? Asked Ethan, beginning to understand this wasn't just a courtesy visit. I'm making an offer. I'll buy the farm from you for a fair price. You keep the money and can have a life more suitable for your age, explained Gerald, watching the boy's reaction. Ethan felt a mix of anger and distrust They had barely arrived, and already someone was trying to take it away from them. "We're not interested in selling, thank you," he replied curtly. "Boy, you don't even know what it means to take care of a rural property. There are water bills, electricity, taxes, maintenance," insisted Gerald. "Not to mention the neighbors who might not be happy with two kids trying to run a serious business." The implicit threat in the man's words made Ethan even more determined not to give in. "We'll manage the bills, and as for the neighbors, we hope they are decent people who respect our rights," he replied, looking directly into the man's eyes. Gerald realized he wouldn't be able to convince Ethan easily. His expression hardened slightly. "All right, boy. But when you find yourselves in trouble, and you will, remember I made a fair offer," he said, heading back to his truck. "And what would that fair offer be?" asked Ethan, more out of curiosity than real interest. $50,000. Cash, replied Gerald, stopping with one hand on the vehicle door. Ethan had no experience in real estate, but even he could tell that amount seemed far too low for a property of 37 acres. "We'll think about it," he lied, just to get rid of the man. "Don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often," Gerald warned before leaving. Ethan watched the truck drive away, feeling a knot in his stomach. Noah appeared at the door as soon as the visitor was out of sight. "What did he want?" asked the boy. "He wants to buy our farm," replied Ethan, still processing the conversation. "But we just got here. Why does he want to buy it?" asked Noah, indignant. "Good question, Noah. Good question," murmured Ethan, looking at the property around him with new eyes. If Gerald was so interested in buying the farm as soon as he heard about the inheritance, perhaps there was something more valuable there than it seemed. And maybe that marking on the basement map wasn't just about pipes or electrical wiring. That afternoon, while Noah played with the chickens in the yard, Ethan decided to explore the property further. He walked to the boundaries of the land, observing the terrain and trying to understand why someone would be so eager to buy it. The land seemed fertile but not exceptional. There was running water crossing part of the property, which was positive, but it wasn't anything extraordinary for the region either. What was most striking was the strategic location, close to town but still rural enough to maintain privacy. During his walk, Ethan noticed that Gerald wasn't the only one interested in watching them. On the other side of the fence, a middle-aged woman was also spying on them from a distance, pretending to tend her garden. When she realized she'd been noticed, she waved timidly and walked away. Upon returning home, he found Noah sitting on the porch, leafing through more papers he had found in a living room drawer. "Ethan, look at this," said Noah, showing a yellowed letter. "It's addressed to us." Ethan took the letter and examined the envelope. Indeed, it was written to Ethan and Noah Mitchell in an elegant cursive script. The paper was yellowed with age, indicating it had been written years ago. "Where did you find this?" asked Ethan. "It was inside a book on the living room shelf. It seems someone hid it there," explained Noah. With trembling hands, Ethan opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, and it was dated 6 years ago, around the time they had arrived at the orphanage. "My dear boys," the letter began, "if you are reading this letter, it means Robert has kept his promise and the farm has reached you. I know you must have many questions about why you are in the orphanage and why you never knew of our existence. The truth is complicated and painful, but you deserve to know. Your parents, my children, did not abandon you by choice. They were forced to leave you in safety while they resolved problems that put them in danger. Unfortunately, they never managed to return. This property holds secrets that could explain a lot. In the basement of the house behind the east wall, there is a compartment containing important documents about our family and about what happened to your parents. Be cautious. Not everyone in the region has good intentions regarding this land. Trust each other and protect yourselves. With all my love, Grandma Margaret." Ethan finished reading the letter with a racing heart. Noah was by his side, trying to follow the words over his shoulder. "Our grandma." "We had a grandma," whispered Noah, his eyes welling up. "And she knew where we were all along," said Ethan, feeling a mix of joy and anger. "Ethan, she talks about the basement. There really was something hidden there," exclaimed Noah, excited by the discovery. Ethan reread the letter, paying special attention to the warning about people with bad intentions in the region. He immediately thought of Gerald's visit that morning. "Noah, I think we need to go to the basement now," said Ethan, making a decision. "Really? How are we going to wait until tomorrow?" asked Noah, suddenly nervous at the prospect of exploring the dark place. "Grandma said to be cautious of the neighbors. If there's something important down there, better we find it soon," explained Ethan, already heading for the house. They found a flashlight in the kitchen and went to the basement door. This time, when Ethan opened it, the cold air that rose brought with it a different feeling. It was as if the place was calling to them. "Stay behind me, Noah," instructed Ethan, starting to descend the wooden steps that creaked under their feet. The basement was larger than they had imagined, extending under almost the entire area of the house. There were old shelves on the walls and some boxes stacked in the corners. The floor was packed dirt, and there were damp marks on the stone walls. "Which is the east wall?" asked Noah, turning in all directions. Ethan tried to orient himself based on the position of the house above them. He pointed to one of the walls farthest from the stairs. "It must be that one over there," he said, walking in that direction with the flashlight. The east wall seemed solid at first glance, but when Ethan ran his hand over it, he noticed that one section sounded different when tapped. It was a hollower sound, as if there was an empty space behind it. "Noah, help me here." "Let's look for some mechanism to open this," asked Ethan. They examined every stone, every crack in the mortar, looking for some kind of hidden lever or button. It was Noah who noticed that one of the stones at eye level was slightly more protruding than the others. "Ethan, try pushing this stone here," suggested Noah. When Ethan pressed the stone, it gave way inward with a soft click. Immediately, a section of the wall moved slightly, revealing it was actually a disguised door. "Wow!" exclaimed Noah, impressed by the ingenuity of the hiding place. Carefully, Ethan pushed the stone door, which opened to reveal a small compartment the size of a cabinet. Inside was a sturdy wooden box and some sealed envelopes. "Let's take everything upstairs," said Ethan, carefully picking up the hidden treasure. Back in the living room with good lighting, they first opened the wooden box. It contained photographs, official documents, and more letters. But what caught their attention the most were the newspaper clippings, dating back 6 years. "Couple disappears mysteriously," read the headline of one of the local newspapers. Ethan felt his blood run cold as he read the names of the missing, David and Susan Mitchell, his parents. "Noah, sit here by my side," said Ethan, his voice trembling. They read together the newspaper articles that told how their parents had disappeared after receiving threats related to a geological discovery they had made on their property. Apparently they worked as environmental consultants and had found signs of valuable mineral deposits in the region. "So our parents didn't die," said Noah, confused. "They just disappeared." "We don't know, Noah. But now we understand why we went to the orphanage," replied Ethan, continuing to examine the documents. Among the papers was a detailed technical report on the geological composition of the farm. Terms like gold deposits and mineral concentration appeared frequently in the text, although the brothers didn't fully understand the meaning. "Ethan, if there's gold here on our farm, are we rich?" asked Noah, his eyes shining. "It's not that simple, Noah. First, we need to properly understand what this means," replied Ethan. But internally he was beginning to understand why Gerald was so interested in the property. There was also a letter from Grandma Margaret explaining that she had hidden those documents because she knew ambitious people would try to take the family's property if they knew about the minerals. "Robert promised to protect the farm until you were old enough to understand and protect your inheritance," she wrote. "Trust only people who show genuine concern for your well-being, not your possessions." That night, the brothers could hardly sleep. Their heads were buzzing with all the day's discoveries. They weren't just orphans who had inherited an ordinary farm. They were the sole heirs to a property that apparently contained significant mineral wealth. Ethan stayed up late, thinking about the implications of that discovery. Now he understood why Gerald had appeared so quickly with a purchase offer. $50,000 for a property with gold deposits was practically theft. But he also felt haunted by unanswered questions. What exactly had happened to their parents? Were they alive somewhere, or had they met a worse fate? And how could two boys protect such a valuable inheritance from people who clearly had bad intentions? The next morning, they were awakened by the sound of several voices talking outside the house. Ethan looked out the window and saw three men in business clothes walking around the property, examining the land and taking notes. "Noah, stay inside," instructed Ethan, going out to confront the intruders. "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" shouted Ethan from the porch. One of the men, the best dressed of the group, walked toward the house. He was young, perhaps in his 30s, and carried a leather briefcase. "Good morning. You must be Ethan, correct?" said the man with a professional smile. "My name is Mr. Bradley Harrison. I'm a lawyer and represent the other heirs of this property." "Other heirs?" asked Ethan, feeling his stomach sink. "I'm afraid so. It seems there was a misunderstanding in the initial documentation. This property legally belongs to a family corporation, of which you are only minor beneficiaries," explained the lawyer, taking documents from his briefcase. "That's not true. The social worker showed us all the papers," protested Ethan. "The documents you saw are valid for temporary residence, but the legal ownership of the land is a more complex matter," said Mr. Bradley, handing the papers to Ethan. Ethan took the documents, but the technical and legal words were incomprehensible to him. There were official stamps and signatures that seemed authentic, but something about the whole situation didn't make sense. "Who are these other heirs?" asked Ethan, suspicious. "Distant cousins of yours, children of your grandfather's sister. They live abroad and hired our services to regularize the situation," explained the lawyer. "And what does that mean for us?" asked Ethan, though he already feared the answer. "You can continue living here temporarily, but the property will be sold to settle inheritance debts. The true heirs are generous people and have established a trust fund to ensure you have resources for education and proper housing," said Mr. Bradley Harrison. The explanation sounded too elaborate, too convenient. Ethan remembered Grandma Margaret's warnings about people with bad intentions. "We want a second legal opinion before signing anything," declared Ethan, surprising the lawyer with his firmness. "Of course, that is your right, but the sale process is already underway. It would be better for everyone if we reached a friendly agreement," said Mr. Bradley Harrison, putting away the papers. "Who is buying the property?" asked Ethan, hoping to confirm his suspicions. "A rural development consortium from the region. They plan to turn the area into a modern agricultural project that will benefit the entire community," the lawyer replied evasively. Ethan watched the other two men continue examining the land. They didn't seem like people interested in agriculture. Their clothes were too expensive, and they focused on specific points in the soil, as if looking for something in particular. "You have until next week to consider the proposal. After that, the process will proceed through legal channels," warned Mr. Bradley Harrison before leaving with his companions. When the men were gone, Noah appeared on the porch, clearly frightened by what he had heard. "Ethan, are they going to take our farm?" he asked with a trembling voice. "Not if they're lying," replied Ethan, determined to find out the truth. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That afternoon, Ethan decided they needed professional help. He remembered that Jennifer had mentioned a support network for orphans in complicated situations. He used the farm phone to call the social services department. "Jennifer, it's Ethan from the Mitchell farm. We need urgent help," he said, when he managed to speak with the social worker. He quickly explained about the lawyer's visit and the claims about other heirs. Jennifer was visibly concerned about the situation. "Ethan, this doesn't make sense. We conducted a thorough search for heirs before placing you at the farm," she said. "I'll investigate these documents immediately." "What if it's true? What if we really don't have a right to the farm?" asked Ethan, voicing his greatest fear. "Even if it is true, which I highly doubt, you have rights that must be respected. No one can simply evict you without a proper legal process," assured Jennifer. She promised to return the next day with a lawyer specializing in minors' rights. But Ethan knew a week wasn't much time to resolve a complex legal issue. That night, while Noah slept, Ethan reread all the letters and documents they had found in the basement. There were details about the mineral deposits he hadn't fully understood on the first reading, Apparently, his parents' discovery wasn't just about gold. The geological report also mentioned deposits of gemstones and rare metals that were extremely valuable to the technology industry. Their property wasn't worth just thousands of dollars. It was potentially worth millions. That explained why so many people had suddenly appeared interested in the farm. Gerald, the mysterious lawyer, and probably others who hadn't even revealed themselves yet. Ethan realized they were in the middle of a much more dangerous situation than he had initially imagined. Two orphaned children against adults, determined to take a fortune that legally belonged to them. The next morning they woke to the sound of heavy machinery. Outside, an excavator was working on Gerald's neighboring property, but very close to the boundary line. "Ethan, they're digging right on the border of our land," observed Noah, worried. Ethan went out to investigate and discovered the excavation was being done exactly on the fence line, possibly encroaching a few yards onto their property. Gerald was supervising the work personally. "Hey, what are you doing there?" shouted Ethan. Gerald approached the fence with a fake smile. "We're just making some improvements to our property, son. Nothing for you to worry about," he replied, but his tone was clearly provocative. "It looks like you're digging on our land," protested Ethan. "Maybe you should check where your fence really is. Sometimes property lines aren't as clear as they seem," said Gerald, turning back to supervise the work. Ethan realized this was yet another pressure tactic. Gerald was deliberately creating confusion about the property boundaries, probably laying the groundwork to challenge the extent of the boys' inheritance. When Jennifer arrived with the lawyer, Mr. Daniel Crawford, Ethan reported all the intimidation attempts they had faced. The lawyer carefully examined all the documents, both the official inheritance papers and those they had found in the basement. "This inheritance documentation is perfectly legal," declared Mr. Daniel. "And these papers claiming the existence of other heirs are clearly fraudulent." "How so?" asked Jennifer. "Several elements indicate forgery. The stamps are crude imitations, the signatures are inconsistent, and the paper used is too new for documents supposedly registered years ago," explained the lawyer. Ethan felt enormous relief, but he knew this wouldn't end the problem. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "First, we'll file a complaint about the attempted document forgery. Then we'll obtain a court order protecting you from any attempt to remove you from the property," said Mr. Daniel. "And what about that excavation on our border?" asked Ethan. Mr. Daniel examined the property maps and confirmed that Gerald was indeed encroaching on the boys' land. "That's trespassing. We'll also file an action to stop the excavation and demand reparations," decided the lawyer. Jennifer stayed at the farm for a few days to support the boys during the legal process. It was during this period that they received an unexpected visit. A lady of about 65 years appeared at the door, carrying a basket of homemade food. She had grey hair tied in a bun and kind eyes that immediately conveyed trust. "Good afternoon, children. My name is Mrs. Dorothy, but everyone calls me Mrs. Dot," she said with a warm smile. "I'm a retired teacher, and I lived near your parents when you were little." "You knew our parents?" asked Noah immediately. "I knew them very well. David and Susan were wonderful people. I was very sad when I heard what happened," replied Mrs. Dot, being invited inside. She brought more information about the boys' family than they had been able to gather so far. She told stories about how their parents were respected in the community, about their passion for environmental work, and about how excited they had been when they found out they were going to have children. "You were the joy of their lives," said Mrs. Dot, looking at old photographs the boys had found. "When they found out they had to leave you, it was the hardest thing they ever faced." "Why did they have to leave us?" asked Ethan. Mrs. Dot hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your parents discovered something that powerful people didn't want known. They were threatened and had to choose between their safety and yours," she explained. "And what happened after?" insisted Noah. "No one knows for sure. They left you at the orphanage, promising to return in a few days, but they were never seen again," said Mrs. Dot, with tears in her eyes. The revelation was devastating for the boys. Not only had they lost their parents, but they had been separated from them because of other people's greed. "Mrs. Dot, do you know who threatened our parents?" asked Ethan. The teacher looked around nervously before answering. "There were rumors about Gerald Thompson and a group of businessmen from the area. But there was never any concrete proof, she whispered. Now everything was starting to make sense. Gerald wasn't just an ambitious neighbor. He was possibly involved in the boy's parents' disappearance. "Why are you telling us this now?" asked Ethan, still processing the information. "Because I saw Gerald lurking around your property, and I got worried. He is not a trustworthy person," explained Mrs. Dot. "And because you deserve to know the truth about your family." Mrs. Dot became a valuable ally. She knew the local community well and could identify who were true friends and who had ulterior motives. She also offered practical help, teaching the boys about basic farm and kitchen care. "The first thing you need to learn is how to properly care for the animals," she said, observing the skinny chickens in the yard. She spent the afternoon teaching them how to prepare proper feed, how to identify signs of illness in the animals, and how to keep the chicken coop clean and safe. Noah proved to be a dedicated learner, absorbing every piece of advice like a sponge. "Chickens can be a good source of income if you take good care of them," explained Mrs. Dot. "Fresh eggs are always in demand in town." Ethan realized there were practical aspects of rural life they needed to master quickly. It wasn't enough to just have legal right to the property. They needed to prove they could keep it running. "Mrs. Dot, could you teach us more things?" "Like planting, taking care of the house, those things?" asked Ethan. "Of course I can, dear, but you'll also need help with your studies. You can't abandon your education because of the farm," she warned. The retired teacher offered to give the boys private lessons, allowing them to continue their studies while learning to run the property. It was a perfect solution to a problem that worried them. During the following week, they established a productive routine. They woke up early to care for the animals, dedicated the morning to studies with Mrs. Dot, worked on the farm during the afternoon, and used the evenings to plan improvements to the property. Ethan discovered he had an aptitude for planning and organization, while Noah showed a natural talent for handling animals. Together, they began to transform the abandoned farm into a functional property. But their improvements did not go unnoticed. Gerald intensified his sabotage attempts now that he realized the boys wouldn't leave the land easily. One morning, they discovered someone had cut the fence during the night, allowing Gerald's cattle to invade their property and destroy the small vegetable garden they had planted. Noah was devastated to see all the work lost. "Why is he doing this to us?" asked Noah, with tears of frustration. "Because he knows we have something he wants very much," answered Ethan, hugging his brother. "Mister." Daniel filed another complaint, but the police investigations were slow. Gerald was influential in the region and had friends in important positions that complicated any legal action against him. It was Mrs. Dot who suggested a different strategy. "You need more allies in the community," she said during one of her visits. "Not everyone here is like Gerald. There are good people who would support you if they knew the truth." She helped the boys organize a community meeting at the local school. The goal was to properly introduce themselves to the neighbors and clarify the facts about their inheritance and their plans for the farm. The meeting was more crowded than they expected. Several families showed up, some curious, others clearly suspicious. Gerald also attended, accompanied by some allies. Ethan, nervous but determined, explained their situation to the audience. "We are Ethan and Noah Mitchell, sons of David and Susan Mitchell. We inherited the farm from our Uncle Robert and want to live here in peace, contributing to the community," he said with a firm voice. Gerald wasted no time in questioning the legitimacy of the inheritance. "These children don't have the ability to maintain a property of this size. They'll end up leaving everything abandoned again," he argued. That's when Mrs. Dot stood up and confronted Gerald publicly. "Gerald Thompson, do you have a problem with orphaned children trying to have a decent life?" she asked, with the authority of someone who had taught entire generations of the community. The question caught Gerald off guard, and several residents began to question his motives. "That's not it, teacher. It's a practical matter," Gerald tried to defend himself. "The only practical matter here is that you want this land for yourself and are trying to intimidate 2 children to get it," replied Mrs. Dot, causing murmurs of approval in the audience. Several residents sided with the boys that night. One family offered help with farming equipment, another offered to teach animal husbandry techniques, and an elderly couple offered support with the heavier household chores. David and Susan were respected people here. If these are their children, they deserve our help, declared an elderly farmer, earning applause from the audience. Gerald left the meeting visibly irritated, but he could no longer count on the community's unconditional support. His true intentions were becoming too clear to ignore. In the following days, the boys' farm received a series of supportive visits. People brought food, tools, advice, and most importantly, moral support. Noah was delighted by the neighbors' generosity. "Ethan, people are much nicer than I thought," he commented after a whole afternoon of receiving visitors. "It's true, Noah, but we still need to be careful. Gerald won't give up easily," Ethan warned. And he was right. Gerald changed his strategy again, this time trying a more subtle approach. He showed up at the farm a few days later, pretending to have accepted the situation. "Boys, I come here to apologize for the misunderstanding," he said, forcing a smile. "You've shown you're determined and deserve a chance." Ethan immediately suspected the man's intentions. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We're happy to have a good relationship with the neighbors," he replied diplomatically. "Actually, I come with a partnership proposal," Gerald continued. "How about if I manage part of your property? We'd split the profits 50-50. The proposal was clearly an attempt to gain control over the land through a seemingly legitimate agreement. "We appreciate the offer, but we prefer to learn to run the farm ourselves," Ethan replied firmly. "Boy, you don't understand the complexity of a rural operation." "There are financial, legal, technical aspects," insisted Gerald. "We have adequate help to deal with those issues," said Ethan, indicating the conversation was over. Gerald realized he wouldn't be able to convince the boys easily. His expression hardened slightly. "Fine. But when you find yourselves in financial difficulties, remember, I tried to help," he said, leaving once more. That night, Ethan spoke with Mrs. Dart about Gerald's visit. "He's not going to give up, is he?" asked Ethan. "Men like Gerald don't give up easily when there's a lot of money involved," she confirmed. "But you have something he didn't expect, the community's support." "And if that's not enough?" asked Noah, who had been listening to the conversation. Mrs. Dart thought carefully before answering. "Then you'll have to be smarter than him, and I have an idea that might help," she said with a mysterious smile. The retired teacher had remembered something important about the region's past. There were historical archives at the town hall that documented irregularities in Gerald's properties, including possible encroachments on public land that had never been properly investigated. "If we can prove Gerald has issues with his own properties, it will significantly weaken his position," she explained. Mr. Daniel Crawford became interested in the information and offered to investigate the historical archives. What he discovered exceeded all expectations. Gerald had expanded his property over the years through questionable methods, including encroaching on public land and forging ownership documents. There was even evidence that he had previously tried to appropriate parts of the Mitchell farm when it belonged to the boy's uncle. "This completely changes the legal landscape," declared Mr. Crawford. "Now we can not only defend against Gerald's attacks, but also question the legitimacy of his properties." The discovery gave the boys a sense of power they hadn't felt since arriving at the farm. They finally had legal weapons to properly defend themselves. But Gerald still had a card up his sleeve. A week later, he appeared at the farm accompanied by two men who identified themselves as environmental inspectors. "We've received reports that illegal activities are being conducted on this property," said one of the inspectors, showing an inspection order. "What kind of illegal activities?" asked Ethan, confused. "Illegal mining and improper waste disposal," replied the inspector, consulting his papers. Ethan immediately realized this was a trap. Gerald had filed false reports to create bureaucratic problems for them. "There's no mining here. We're just two kids taking care of chickens and a small garden," protested Ethan. "Even so, we need to conduct a full inspection," said the inspector, heading off to examine the property. The inspectors spent hours walking around the farm, digging in random spots and taking photographs. Gerald accompanied them, clearly pleased with the situation. "Don't worry, boys. If there's nothing irregular, you won't have any problems," said Gerald with false sympathy. But Ethan knew Gerald wouldn't do this unless he had a plan to create false evidence of irregularities. When the inspectors finished their work, they announced they would return with a preliminary report in a few days. "Until then, we recommend you don't carry out any excavation or earth-moving activities," warned one of them. After the inspectors left, Mrs. Dot appeared to check how the boys were handling the new pressure. "Gerald is trying to use bureaucracy against you," she observed, "but two can play at that game." She suggested they contact independent environmental agencies to obtain their own assessments of the property. If they could demonstrate that the farm was in perfect environmental condition, it would invalidate any negative reports that Gerald's inspectors might produce. Mr. Daniel Crawford agreed with the strategy and arranged for independent environmental experts to come. Their report was extremely positive, praising the quality of the soil and water on the property. "This land is in excellent conservation status," declared the biologist in charge of the report. "In fact, it would be an environmental crime to allow any predatory mining activity here." When the original inspectors returned, they tried to present a report alleging minor irregularities that would require fines and embargo periods. But Mr. Daniel Crawford was prepared. "We have here an independent report that completely contradicts your conclusions," he said, presenting the document from the environmental experts. The inspectors were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them admitted that their analyses had been preliminary and that there might have been methodological misunderstandings. "It appears there was an unfounded complaint," concluded Mr. Daniel Crawford. "We will file a formal complaint about the misuse of public resources to pursue orphaned children." Gerald, who had bet on the effectiveness of his bureaucratic sabotage, saw yet another of his strategies fail publicly. His reputation in the community was being seriously damaged, but instead of discouraging him, the successive failures only increased his determination. If he couldn't obtain the farm through legal or quasi-legal means, perhaps it was time to try more direct methods. One night, Noah woke up to the sound of engines on the property. He looked out the window and saw lights moving in the field, as if someone was operating heavy machinery in the darkness. "Ethan! Ethan! Someone's digging on our land!" shouted Noah, running to his brother's room. Ethan woke up immediately and ran to the window. Indeed, there was an excavator working in an area far from the house near the property boundaries. "Noah, call the police. I'm going out there to see what's happening," said Ethan, quickly putting on his clothes. "Don't go alone, it's dangerous," protested Noah. "Then come with me, but stay behind me the whole time," decided Ethan. The boys cautiously approached the area where the machines were working. In the darkness, they could identify at least 3 men supervising the excavation of a deep trench. "They're looking for the mineral deposits," whispered Ethan to Noah. "But that's theft," exclaimed Noah, forgetting to keep his voice down. One of the men heard the noise and pointed a flashlight toward the boys. "Hey, someone's over there," shouted the man. Ethan grabbed Noah's hand, and they ran back to the house as fast as they could. Behind them, they could hear the men shouting orders and the sound of engines starting up. They arrived home breathless and locked all the doors. The police promised to send a patrol car, but warned it might take over an hour due to the farm's remote location. "What if they come here to the house?" asked Noah, clearly frightened. "They won't. They don't want witnesses to what they're doing," replied Ethan, trying to sound more confident than he actually felt. They spent the rest of the night awake, listening to the sounds of excavation that continued until almost dawn. When the police finally arrived, the intruders had already left, leaving only a deep trench and signs of soil disturbance. "Looks like they were looking for something specific," observed the police officer, examining the excavation. "Probably mineral deposits," explained Ethan, deciding it was time to be completely honest about the situation. He showed the police officer the geological documents they had found in the basement, explaining the land's potential value and Gerald's attempts to seize the property. The officer was visibly impressed by the complexity of the situation. "This goes far beyond a simple trespassing case," he said. "We'll have to call investigators specializing in economic crimes." The formal police investigation brought significant changes to the boys' situation. Gerald and his associates were now being investigated for trespassing, attempted theft of natural resources, and document forgery. But it also brought unwanted attention. News about the mineral deposits began to spread, attracting other people interested in the boys' property. Representatives from mining companies started showing up, offering exploration contracts that would earn the boys millions of dollars. The offers were tempting, especially considering the financial difficulties they were facing. "You could become rich overnight," said one of the executives, "and you'd still keep ownership of the land." Ethan was tempted, but he remembered the instructions left by his parents and grandparents about protecting the land from predatory exploitation. "We need to think carefully before making any decision," he replied diplomatically. Mrs. Dot supported him in this cautious stance. "Your parents gave their lives to protect this land from irresponsible exploitation. You shouldn't make hasty decisions," she advised. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, Mr. Daniel Crawford suggested they consult independent experts before considering any mining contract. He knew geologists and economists who could objectively evaluate the company's proposals. Many of these companies offer contracts that seem generous, but are actually extremely advantageous for them, the lawyer warned. Meanwhile, Gerald's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The investigations had revealed a web of irregularities in his properties that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. He had forged ownership documents for at least 3 different properties, trespassed on public lands worth millions of dollars, and bribed public officials to obtain fraudulent environmental permits. "Gerald Thompson is facing charges that could result in decades in prison," Mr. Daniel informed the boys. "He won't be a problem for you anymore." But Gerald's arrest revealed he wasn't the only one interested in the Mitchell property. Other members of his group continued to pressure the boys, though in a more subtle way. An elegant lawyer appeared at the farm, claiming to represent investors interested in sustainable development. "We know you care about the environment," she said. "Our clients share that concern and want to develop mining responsibly." Ethan had learned to be skeptical of any proposal that came their way. "Who are your clients?" he asked. "An international consortium committed to environmentally sound mining practices," she replied evasively. "We want specific names and documents proving this environmental commitment," Ethan demanded. The lawyer seemed surprised by the sophistication of the boy's response. "Of course, we will provide all necessary documentation," she said, but she never returned. Mr. Daniel explained that this was a common tactic of companies wanting to avoid public scrutiny of their practices. "If they don't want to reveal their identity, it's because they have something to hide," he said. The following months were dedicated to learning about the responsible management of natural resources. Ethan and Noah studied sustainable mining, environmental impact, and natural resource economics. They discovered there were ways to extract value from the property without causing significant environmental damage. Selective mining, ecotourism, and organic farming were some of the alternatives. "We don't have to choose between protecting the land and having a financially stable life," Ethan observed after months of study. With the help of Mrs. Dot and Mr. Daniel Crawford, they developed a long-term plan for the property. Part of the land would be dedicated to sustainable agriculture. Another part would be preserved as an environmental reserve, and a small section could be used for extremely controlled mining. "It's an ambitious plan, but you have time to implement it gradually," said Mr. Daniel Crawford, approving the strategy. The farm began to thrive under the boys' careful management. The chicken raising expanded to include other birds, the vegetable garden grew into a minor commercial operation, and they began receiving visitors interested in rural tourism. Noah, now 10 years old, had become an expert in animal care. His passion and dedication impressed experienced adults in the field. "This boy has a natural gift," commented a veterinarian who visited the farm. "With proper training, he could become one of the best breeders in the region." Ethan, at 13, demonstrated exceptional leadership and planning skills. He coordinated the different farm activities with an efficiency that surprised the adults around them. "You two are extraordinary," observed Mrs. Dot during one of her regular visits. "Your parents would be very proud." The mention of their parents still brought mixed feelings for the boys. The pain of the loss had lessened, but questions about their fate remained unanswered. "Mrs. Dot, do you think our parents are still alive somewhere?" Noah asked during a particularly nostalgic afternoon. "I don't know, dear, but I know they loved you very much and would want to know that you are well and happy," she replied tenderly. Ethan had matured enough to accept that they might never know exactly what happened to their parents. The important thing was to honor their memory through their choices and actions. One day, while organizing old farm documents, Noah found another letter hidden in a book. "Ethan, there's another letter here," he exclaimed. This letter was different. It was dated just 2 years ago, and the handwriting was male, different from Grandma Margaret's. "To my dear nephews," the letter began. "My name is Robert, your father's brother. If you are reading this letter, it means I managed to protect the property until you arrived here. I couldn't raise you because I was also being pursued by the same men who threatened your parents. But I watched you from a distance all these years, through trusted friends at the orphanage. I know you will face challenges to keep this land, but you have something no adversary can take from you. You are family, you are united, and you are intelligent. The wealth of this property is not only in the minerals underground, but in its ability to sustain you and contribute to the surrounding community. Protect yourselves, protect the land, and protect each other. You are stronger together than anyone could imagine. With all my love, Uncle Robert P.S. In the last book on the top shelf there are more documents that may be useful in the future." Noah immediately ran to fetch the book mentioned in the letter. Inside they found a detailed map of the entire property, including precise locations of mineral deposits and notes about the best areas for different types of agriculture. There were also copies of all the property's legal documents and detailed instructions on how to handle various types of external pressure. "Our uncle really took care to prepare us for all this," observed Ethan, moved by the discovery. "He loved us even though he couldn't be with us," said Noah, hugging the letter as if it were an embrace from the uncle they had never known. With their Uncle Robert's information, the boys were able to refine their plans for the farm even further. They now had a precise map that would allow them to extract resources in an extremely selective manner, minimizing the environmental impact. Mr. Daniel helped them establish a family foundation that would manage the property's resources responsibly. Part of the profits would be reinvested in the farm, another part would be set aside for the boys' education, and a third part would be used for community projects. "You are creating a model of sustainable development that could inspire other rural families," observed the lawyer, impressed with the plan's maturity. The foundation attracted the attention of universities and environmental organizations interested in studying and supporting the project. The Mitchell farm began receiving students and researchers who wanted to learn about their sustainable practices. "It's amazing how you turned a vulnerable situation into an opportunity for community leadership," commented a university professor who visited the property. Noah, now recognized as a young expert in sustainable animal husbandry, began giving lectures to other rural youth in the region. His passion and knowledge inspired children his own age to become interested in country life. Ethan developed management skills that impressed experienced adults. He coordinated the farm's operations, managed the family finances, and represented the foundation at official meetings. "These boys are an example of how adversity can be turned into strength," said Mrs. Dott during an interview for a local newspaper that was documenting the family's story. The positive notoriety of the Mitchell farm brought unexpected benefits to the entire region. Other properties began adopting similar sustainable practices, creating a network of responsible rural development. The municipal government created an incentive program for sustainable agriculture based on the model developed by the boys. Other rural families began receiving technical and financial support to implement similar practices. "You not only saved your own farm but inspired a regional transformation," declared the mayor during a recognition ceremony. 2 years after arriving at the farm, Ethan and Noah had become respected young leaders in their community. The property they inherited as helpless orphans was now a model of sustainable success. Gerald, meanwhile, had been convicted of multiple crimes and was facing a long prison sentence. His properties were confiscated by the state to compensate for the damages caused by his illegal activities. "Justice can be slow sometimes, but it eventually prevails," commented Mr. Daniel when informing the boys of Gerald's final conviction. But the greatest transformation wasn't in the farm or the region, but in the boys themselves. Noah had become a confident and skilled young man, with a clear passion for caring for animals and protecting the environment. Ethan had developed a maturity and wisdom that impressed much older adults. His experience leading the family through crises had given him exceptional management and negotiation skills. "Sometimes I think our parents planned all this," said Ethan, during a quiet evening on the porch, watching the stars. "How so?" asked Noah. "They prepared us to be strong, to take care of each other, and to protect what's important. Even though they aren't here physically, they taught us everything we needed to know," explained Ethan. Noah thought about his brother's words for a long moment. "Do you think they knew we were going to succeed?" he finally asked. "I think they knew we were going to try, and that by trying together we'd have a real chance of winning," replied Ethan. The farm around them represented much more than just land and natural resources. It was a testament to determination, family unity, and growth through adversity. During a foundation meeting, an international consultant commented on what he had observed on the property. "You've created something unique here. It's not just a sustainable farming operation, but a model for how families can overcome tragedies and build something positive for future generations," he said. The boys had learned valuable lessons about trust, determination, and the importance of building strong relationships in the community. Mrs. Dot continued to be a constant presence in their lives, offering wisdom and emotional support. "You've taught me as much as I've taught you," she said during one of her visits. "You've shown me that age doesn't determine one's ability to make a difference in the world." The story of the Mitchell brothers began to be told in other regions of the country as an example of overcoming challenges and sustainable development. Universities included their case in studies on family management of natural resources. Delegations from other states visited the farm to learn about their practices and methodologies. The boys had inadvertently become ambassadors for a new model of rural development. "We never imagined our struggle to keep our home would become an inspiration for other families," commented Ethan during a national conference on rural sustainability. Noah, now 12 years old, had enrolled in a distance education program that allowed him to study veterinary science while continuing to manage the farm animals. His reputation as a young expert in sustainable livestock farming was constantly growing. Ethan, at 15, was already considered one of the state's most promising young rural entrepreneurs. Universities offered scholarships so he could formalize his education in agricultural management and sustainable development. "Education is important, but you already have practical experience that most college students will never have," observed a visiting professor. The Mitchell Foundation had become self-sustaining, generating revenue through its farming operations, educational programs, and sustainability consulting. The boys had not only protected their inheritance, but had transformed it into a source of benefits for the entire region. 3 years after arriving at the farm, the brothers received an unexpected visit. Jennifer, the social worker who had initially brought them, appeared for a follow-up visit. "When I left you here 3 years ago, I hoped you would manage to adapt reasonably well," she said, observing the thriving property. "I never imagined you would create something so impressive." Jennifer was documenting the boys' case to present as a successful model of family placement. Their story was being used to improve support programs for orphans throughout the state. "You've proven that, with proper support and determination, children in vulnerable situations can not only survive but thrive exceptionally," she said. During this visit, Jennifer brought information the boys did not expect. Recent investigations had revealed new details about the disappearance of their parents. "Authorities discovered that your parents managed to escape the initial threats, but were forced to live in hiding to protect you," Jennifer explained carefully. "Are they alive?" asked Noah immediately. "The investigations indicate they might be alive, but in protection programs that prevent them from making direct contact," replied Jennifer. The news brought a mix of hope and frustration for the boys. Knowing their parents were possibly alive was wonderful, but continuing without being able to see them was painful. "Why can't they get in touch now that Gerald has been arrested?" asked Ethan. "Because Gerald was only one part of a larger network. There are still dangerous people involved in the original situation," explained Jennifer. "Mr. Daniel confirmed that the investigations into their parents' disappearance had revealed connections to organized crime that went far beyond the local region. Your parents witnessed illegal activities involving very powerful people. Until those people are brought to justice, your parents need to remain in protection," explained the lawyer. The revelation was hard to accept, but it also brought a renewed sense of purpose for the boys. They weren't just protecting their farm, they were preserving a legacy their parents had risked their lives to defend. "Now we understand why it was so important to protect this land," said Ethan. "It's not just about us or about money, it's about doing the right thing." Noah, though younger, also understood the magnitude of the situation. "Our parents sacrificed to protect what's right. Now it's up to us to continue that work," he said, with a determination surprising for his age. The following years were dedicated to further strengthening their sustainable operations and expanding the positive impact of the foundation. The Mitchell Farm became an internationally recognized center for responsible rural development. Ethan decided to accept a university scholarship, but chose a program that allowed him to continue living on the farm and applying his learning directly to the family operations. Noah continued developing his expertise in sustainable animal husbandry, working with veterinarians and biologists to develop innovative management techniques. "You've found the perfect way to honor your parents and build your own future," observed Mrs. Dot, now over 70 years old, but still an active presence in the boys' lives. The community around the farm had prospered alongside the brothers' success. New sustainable businesses emerged, ecotourism grew, and the region became nationally known for its exemplary environmental practices. "For you didn't just save a farm, you transformed an entire region," commented the mayor during a recognition ceremony for the boys' 5 years of management. On a spring morning, 4 years after arriving at the farm, the brothers were working in the field when they saw a car approaching on the dirt road. It wasn't unusual for them to receive visitors, but something about that car seemed different. 2 people got out of the vehicle, a middle-aged man and woman. Even from a distance, there was something familiar in their silhouettes that made Ethan's heart race. "Noah, do you see those people?" whispered Ethan. Noah stopped feeding the chickens and looked in the indicated direction. His eyes widened as he recognized features he had seen only in old photographs. "Ethan, could it be—" began Noah, his voice trembling with emotion. The couple approached slowly, as if they too were uncertain how to proceed. When they got close enough for their faces to be clearly visible, there was no more doubt. "My boys," said the woman, tears streaming down her face. "Dad? Mom?" whispered Noah, dropping the chicken feed. The reunion was a mixture of intense joy and years of accumulated longing. Long hugs, tears of happiness, and words broken by emotion dominated the first moments. "You've grown so much," said David, looking at his sons he had left as small children. "We couldn't come back sooner because it wasn't safe," explained Susan, holding her sons' faces as if wanting to memorize every detail. Mr. Daniel Crawford arrived shortly after, explaining he had coordinated the reunion after the last people involved in the original crime were finally arrested. "Your parents have been in federal protection all these years, but it's finally safe for them to return," the lawyer informed. The following days were dedicated to reconnecting as a family. David and Susan were amazed by the transformations their sons had made on the farm. "You've exceeded our most optimistic expectations," said David, observing the sustainable operations the boys had developed. "We are so proud of who you've become," added Susan, hugging both sons. But the family reunion also brought difficult decisions. The parents wanted to reclaim the lost time, while the boys had developed independence and responsibilities they couldn't simply abandon. "We want to be with you, but we also respect the life you've built here," said Susan during a family conversation. "And we want you to be part of this life," replied Ethan. "The farm has room for the whole family." David and Susan decided to settle on the property, contributing their knowledge in environmental sciences to further expand the farm's sustainable operations. "We can work together to make this property an even more impressive model of sustainability," suggested David. The Mitchell family reunion marked the beginning of a new phase for the farm. With the parents' professional experience, combined with the practical skills the boys had developed, the growth possibilities multiplied. Noah, now 15, was studying veterinary science by correspondence, while significantly expanding the farm's livestock operations. His reputation as a young expert had grown nationally. Ethan, at 18, had become a recognized leader in sustainable rural development. Universities invited him for lectures and consultations, and he began writing a book on family management of natural resources. "Your sons are extraordinary," Mrs. Dot said to David and Susan during one of the family gatherings. They turned tragedy into triumph. The Mitchell farm continued growing in importance and impact. The model developed by the family was being replicated in various regions of the country, always with appropriate local adaptations. 5 years after the family reunion, the property had become a federally recognized center for rural sustainability research and education. "You have created a legacy that will benefit future generations," declared a minister during an official visit to the farm. The story of the Mitchell brothers had become a symbol of hope for orphaned children and rural families across the country. Books were written about their journey, documentaries were produced, and academic studies analyzed their success model. But for Ethan and Noah, the most important thing wasn't the external recognition. It was the fact that they had managed to keep their family together, protect their heritage, and contribute positively to their community. "Sometimes I think we went through all of that to learn what really matters in life," reflected Ethan during a conversation with Noah. "And what really matters?" asked Noah. "Family, community, and responsibility. Everything else is just a consequence of those 3 things," replied Ethan. The Mitchell farm continued to prosper, but more importantly, it became a true home for a family that had been separated by adversity and reunited through determination, love, and hard work. During a recognition ceremony for the farm's 10 years of management, Ethan was invited to speak about the family's journey. "We started as 2 orphaned children, afraid of the future," he said to the audience. "We learned that the true value of a legacy is not in what it can give us, but in what we can do with it to benefit others. Our farm is not just our home, it is our contribution to a better world," added Noah, now a respected young adult in his field. The audience applauded not just for the words, but for the living example of how adversity can be transformed into strength when one has determination, community support, and solid values. "You have proven that heroes can be ordinary people, facing extraordinary circumstances with courage and integrity," commented one of the ceremony's participants. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story and where you are watching from. Leave your honest opinion in the comments. Do you believe Ethan and Noah made the right decisions? We look forward to reading your feedback. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.